Welcome to this special episode of the Filmumentaries Podcast, episode 82 in fact. Today is a small diversion from the usual. Rather than film history, I have three guests who are very much part of the film now, or TV now. These three gentlemen are at the forefront of VFX for ILM and Lucasfilm at Disney Plus's Emmy Award nominated show Andor. Genuinely one of my favourite shows for a long time. Not only my favourite Star Wars for a long time, but my favourite anything for a long time. So for this month, August 2023, there will be 3 episodes, and they'll all be conversations with ILM VFX and Skywalker sound artists and technicians in celebration of their recent Emmy Award nominations. More of that in a moment, but firstly, I just want to welcome you if you're a new listener. Despite being a little diversion, this is very much the same as you can expect from the other 81 episodes. Essentially, it's a conversation with artists that I admire about their work. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. If you do like my work, please consider donating $12 or your country's currency equivalent to help pay for an entire year of episodes. That's at least 24 episodes. And honestly, it will most likely be more because sometimes I do bonus episodes as and when I get the opportunity, like this one. Now, if you are a regular listener to the podcast, you'll know that I hosted a panel at Star Wars Celebration here in London back in May, and I mention it to literally anyone that will listen. And on that panel were VFX experts Mohen Leo, TJ Falls, Scott Pritchard, and special effects supervisor Richard Van Den Bergh. Now, due to some complication backstage, the panel was not recorded, save for a few snippets that ILM recorded for their internal use. So I've already dedicated an entire episode to Richard Van Den Bergh about his career in special effects. That was episode 80. And while it wasn't an episode specifically about Andor, we did talk about the show a little, so you can check that one out. It's just a couple of episodes back. And then recently, ILM got in touch with me and asked if I'd like to interview the 3 VFX guys on the podcast. They, along with Richard, have been nominated in the category of Outstanding Special Visual Effects in a Season or a Movie 2023. I immediately, of course, said yes, and within 24 hours I was chatting with these 3 wonderful artists again. So here's my conversation with Mohen Leo, production VFX supervisor, TJ Falls, VFX producer, and Scott Pritchard, ILM VFX supervisor. And I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I just want to congratulate you, first of all, on the Emmy nomination. Must be really gratifying to see your work nominated and put in front of all your contemporaries and your colleagues, and, you know, a celebration of what you did.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's really rewarding. It's also, you know, a bit unexpected. We don't do it, you know, for this moment in time, but to actually be acknowledged and have the work appreciated in the way it is really gratifying, really fulfilling. It's really nice.
It does mean, though, that you have to, you know, up your game constantly now, you know.
No
so
pressure,
the pressure's
David,
on. Yeah. We, of course, had that wonderful afternoon, or was it morning? I can't remember, back in May at Star Wars Celebration, where we had 1,000 people turn up to come and listen to you guys talk about your work along with Richard Van Den Bergh, who did the special effects on the show. It was a great chance for the fans to come along and listen to sort of behind the scenes stories and to talk to you guys. We're going to go over much of the same material here because one of the regrets of that panel is that it wasn't recorded and we couldn't get it out in any other form. So it's great that I've got the opportunity to talk to you again, and we will cover some of the same ground, but I could talk about this all day, as I'm sure you're aware, but hopefully it will be about an hour as well. Mohen, looking at the concept of Andor, it's not your typical Star Wars show. It doesn't have the typical tropes. There aren't Jedi. There aren't that many space battles as such, really. We don't have lightsabers. Did that impact on how you approached the effects work? Was that freeing that you didn't have those big flashy moments and you could have more subtlety in the show? How did that sort of guide your approach?
Yeah, I think it definitely did have an effect on it. In a way, it's an extension that of the work that we did on Rogue One that both TJ and I had worked on before with Tony Gilroy, who was the showrunner of Andor. And I think early on we had conversations about the aesthetic that Tony was looking for this show, like back in 2019 when we first talked about it. And I think to him as well, what was important was that everything had to feel grounded, had to feel sort of believable, because the story is not about larger than life figures. It's not about, people with superpowers and heavy fantasy elements, but really, once again, like Rogue One, sort of more about, the quote unquote normal people and their struggles. And so with that, it was really important to him that everything felt sort of tangible and tactile and believable. So I think more than we always try to sort of take inspiration from the real world, but I think with this show, more than with some of the other Star Wars projects, we really try to anchor everything in something that would exist in reality. So on the one hand, when we're creating environments, we always try to have something we could shoot first, not placing people in front of things that were entirely made up, but either having a set or, for Coruscant, quite often like London locations that we could basically take the director and the DP could go there and actually find their angles, take advantage of the real light, the real weight of the architecture. And then sometimes we would still replace like 80% of the frame with visual effects ultimately later on. But I think to give everything that grounded feel, it's really important that the camera was always pointed at something that would provide the basis for what would eventually make out of it.
Yeah, there is that really grounded feel to the show. I often think of the way that we kind of get the establishing shot on a new location. It's not like your typical Star Wars wide shot. It's has an everyday feel to it. Like there's that opening shot with Cassian, that walkway, which I believe was shot in Essex, which is like 10 miles from where I am now. And we see the rain, we see his footsteps on the ground. We're sort of grounded into that moment. And then the work that was done on set and with the special effects is then backed up by you guys. TJ, can you talk about how the special effects work and the on-set work influenced your work?
Absolutely. In the spirit of the collaboration this show provided, which was immense, and everyone involved played such a pivotal role, which is also nice for us because we're interacting closely with every single department. And so with special effects, we were able to build out and find the proper handoff between the practical and the digital, so that we got just as much practical work in as we needed versus when our digital extensions would take over or effects would take over. And that opening shot is a good example, because we had to have rain, we had to have wind, we had to have all these pieces that you got somewhat on location, but we also needed to shoot elements for so much of the work in the show. We weren't relying simply on digital creations of elements. So working hand in hand with Richard and his team, we were able to get rain, fire, smoke, explosion, everything that we needed that you see in the show essentially has some basis of practicality built into it. And being able to work hand in hand with somebody like that certainly helps make it very easy to understand whose responsibility is what, so that there isn't, a preponderance of one department over another. It's everybody working in concert together.
I think also on that note, I think we were, on the one hand, collectively we're saying at the start, let's try to do as much practical as we can. But eventually, I have to say, in some sequence, we were even surprised ultimately how much was possible practical and how little we had to do in post. So, for example, in episode 3, there's the shootout in the abandoned factory with these giant metal pieces hanging from the ceiling that come crashing down. That was basically all done practically. There were ultimately like maybe 2 shots or so in the sequence where, just for safety reasons, we had to shoot things in several layers where the actors were separate from the thing falling down. But other than that, other than the blaster shots, but all of the interactions of these things swinging around and crashing down was done entirely practically in a real set. And so it's fantastic.
And a lot of that was able to be achieved because it was well planned as well. So again, it is getting the departments together. So we had a good sense of the set and the space from Luke Cole and the art department and their team. We previs the entire sequence with special effects, with production design, with the director, with the DP, so that everybody knew to an absolute certainty what would happen. Then you get there on the day, and there's always the intangibility of real things happening, and it went off perfectly, exactly what we wanted. And that's, the way that it can all come together in a really, really good way.
Yeah, the panel, I asked Richard about that sequence and said, how much work is his and how much work is yours? And he said, well, you're going to have to ask those guys. And then, Mohen, when you said it was almost 100% practical, he decided it was his favourite sequence of the entire series, which amused me. Scott, we sort of talking about, these practical elements and working with something to ground things on. You were in charge of the aerial unit as part of your job, and you did some shooting and had... you come across, when you're doing things practically, you come across those happy accidents that you might not happen to come across if you weren't doing them in that way. You went out to Lanzarote, was it, that you shot some of the aerials? Yeah. And what was the experience like in doing that?
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, to go up in a helicopter with a stabilized camera on the front and go and shoot aerial plates is really something. And yeah, I mean, happy accidents. We had the plan was that Ferrex was going to be this kind of overcast, slightly misty, foggy environment. We had a set of the Ferrex town itself, built in Marlow in Buckinghamshire, and just outside of London, and predominantly fairly overcast plates for that. And then we also shot some reference photography up in Port Ayton Seaton, which is a dockyard where they dismantle oil rigs. And we had these incredible photographs of these huge oil rigs just looming out of this amazing mist and fog. So that was definitely the kind of the desired aesthetic. Now, the Canary Islands is predominantly quite a sunny location, but that had been chosen because of the amazing volcanic red and black soil that's there in the Tinninfaya National Park, the volcanic national park, as part of Lanzarote. And we got the helicopter set up, and we were due to go on a test flight, just to check that the weight of everything was okay, because when you hang a big heavy camera off the nose of the helicopter, it just has to be, they have to make sure that the balance is right in the back of the helicopter so it can fly properly. So we went on a test flight, flew up into the mountains, and suddenly it was just this incredible, foggy, misty, backlit, beautiful environment. And the camera operator and I just kind of turned to each other, should we just shoot this? So the 10-minute test flight turned into like an hour and a half shoot. And we shot, I think we shot 80% of the shots that we were due to get over the next couple of days on that one shoot. And they were just beautiful.
It's great when you come across something like that where you wouldn't necessarily think that, you're going to get the results that you were intending to get. It is those happy accidents, isn't it? That, we assume don't happen in visual effects anymore, but of course they do, because you're using each of the different disciplines of your job as a tool to create the best environment that you can. We also saw in some of the press, I think later on, and maybe in our panel as well, that you used some of the stagecraft technology, so the big LEDs, but not in the way that people would imagine. I think people need to be reminded, and I'm hoping you're going to do that in a moment, but people need to be reminded that this isn't like a technology that's going to solve every problem. I recently spoke to Pablo Hellman, who worked on The Fabelmans with Spielberg, and they did some screencraft stuff, or stagecraft stuff with the car scene. Can you talk a little bit about how you use that LED technology, but in ways that people wouldn't necessarily expect?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So for the stagecraft build for this particular show, it was due to provide these environment extensions to the Chandrilan Embassy on Coruscant. So the set guys at Pinewood built this amazing set of the embassy, and there were two main rooms in this set. there was a dining room which had a long straight wall with lots of windows in a line, and then there was also a parlor room, which is a much more kind of intimate and closed set where more private conversations could be had, and that had a curved bench with a curved series of windows behind it. And what we did, we had our LED walls were alongside both of those. There were two walls. There was one which was a straight one, and then one which curved around the windows. And the job of the stagecraft content was basically to provide the coruscant locations outside, so the views out to the city. So we developed 4 times a day for 2 views, one out the dining room and one out the parlor. And we could instantly switch between foggy night to rainy day to clear day. So it could alter depending on the time of day that was set up for the sequence. But one of the key things that we had for stagecraft was that we have an iPad on set where we can control a lot of the various elements of the content on the screen. So we can shift different layers of the city around. We can adjust exposure and color balance of the content. So we work very, very closely with the director of photography to make sure that is another aesthetic element of the shot. So it's something that the director of photography has a vested interest in. So we work very, very closely with them just to make sure that that's got the right photographic look when it's viewed through the camera.
Yeah, has it been difficult to kind of get directors of photography to kind of adopt this new technology? Is there some sort of cynicism towards it, or initial kind of, this is too bright, or this is too difficult to work with, or is it a tool that they find easy to adapt to?
I mean, philosophically, we're not, we look for the right tool for the right challenge that we're trying to solve in the production. So it's not forcing tool sets on anybody. It's really going, well, here's a set, here's a scene that we have to achieve. What's the best way to do it? And in this situation, stagecraft was absolutely the best option. So when it's discussed as a collaborative effort, again, it becomes a very simple conversation of here's what you get, here's what it is. But then it is inherently a DP conversation in terms of lighting and the creative aspect of it.
Yeah, but I so far we on both seasons have not had a DP ever turn down the opportunity to light with a LED screen, just because they know how much more control it gives them, and so because normally the alternative would have been that we would have had a big blue screen out there which doesn't even function as a light source. So for daytime scenes where you want the majority of your light to be actually like daylight that comes in, the LED screens are so much better. The other thing to keep in mind is that really over the last few years now, all of the DPs are working in a way where they have an operator standing next to them with an iPad that has full control over every single light that's in the set, down to like blinking LED lights and giant sky panels and everything. And they'll just, their job now is to go like, okay, make that one, 10% darker, a little bit red over here, stop that blinking. And to then have another operator standing next to them and go like, I'll make the sky a little bit brighter and take that down. They're perfectly comfortable with that. So I think it worked out really, really well.
Yeah, it's great that people are adopting those new methods. One thing we've not really discussed, and maybe we should just take a couple of minutes to do so, is to kind of talk about your different role titles and how they interact with each other, because otherwise I'm just going to mess it up. It's better coming from you.
So I'm the VFX supervisor on the studio side with TJ being the VFX producer, and then Scott was the ILM visual effects, or is the ILM visual effects supervisor, because we do ultimately work with multiple vendors on the show, and so I'm sort of overseeing the whole thing, and I'm present on the shoot the whole time. Scott oversaw in post-production all of the work done by ILM.
Okay.
And TJ has to make sure it comes in on time and on budget.
Yeah, work through all the logistics, all the planning, and make sure that everybody's working in concert together, as well as the collaboration between all of our departments on the show side and between everyone that works from our pre-vis, post-vis vendors, the third floor that we're using with Jen Kitching, who's our supervisor, through all of our vendors, so ILM, Hybrid, Scanline, Soho VFX, and Rising Sun, who all played a key component, as well as our in-house team that was led by Mark Hutchings. So all of us work together, feeding all of the creative pieces into Mohen, who then ensures that we've got a consistency over the 12 episodes of the show and that everything matches Tony's vision. I mean, it's quite an undertaking, but that's why we need everybody to do their piece and their part. And we have partners like Scott. It becomes a very fulfilling and rather fun experience.
One other thing that I'm interested about in terms of the supervisor role is how you can kind of draw all of the threads together and create a kind of cohesive look and ensure there is a cohesive look. What kind of methods do you use to ensure that everyone is kind of on the same page?
I mean, one of the things that on this show what has really helped is that we've known, Tony since Rogue One. And so I think that there is sort of a bit of a shorthand already with expectations and also a lot of trust, where quite frequently he would just sort of describe in broad terms what he's after aesthetically and then allow us to sort of put something together and present it to him. I think for me personally, it's also just the really close collaboration with the production designer, with Luke Hull, who's just been fantastic. And it's just been this really good collaboration, both on a practical side to say like, okay, well, how much set do we need to build? How much can we then do digital extensions? How do we really spend our time and money wisely between the real things and the digital things? But then also making sure that all of those things fit together, that the aesthetic of the digital extensions that we do is completely coherent with Luke's vision for all of the practical things that they're building and the locations that they're making. So it's a really close collaboration there. And then with, working with people like Scott and the supervisors at the other vendors, it is talking, I mean, sometimes almost daily, just going through things, going through reference inspirations, talking about, the things that because we also want to make sure that then the vendors and the supervisors at each vendor bring their own ideas into it. So often we're basically saying, hey, this is what we're after, sort of in terms of the emotion of the scene, the aesthetics of the scene, but then giving them freedom to actually sort of expand on that as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott, I thought you were going to expand on that then, but you just nodded. That's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, absolutely. And that goes as well for my interactions with my crew in ILM as well. And that, you having I've been at ILM London now for nearly 10 years. So I was part of the initial team that kind of set up the studio and helped recruit a lot of the artists. So I know how much I know firsthand how much work has gone into building the team there, and you have this incredible, slate of creative talent there, and it seems such a shame to basically sit there and go and tell them what to do and how to do it. So I, again, like Mohen with gives to me and the other vendors, you give them creative freedom to explore their own ideas as well and bring those ideas to the table, because you've got this amazing team of creative brains there who might think of something that you never would have thought of. And it's always a really fun process to be surprised in our dailies review sessions with something that somebody's just got, I've done this, but then I've also done this. And we had quite a few moments like that on the show where there was for instance, in the end sequence when we get into those close-up shots of the Death Star, one of our artists actually put in some modular blocks, which are very recognizable shapes. I never discussed this with them. I never told them to do this, but they were based on the original Death Star trench run miniature that ILM in Van Nuys in LA did for the first Star Wars movie, and he just kind of snuck them into the background in a little kind of Easter egg, and that was just brilliant. So nice. it is really enjoyable when people kind of bring those ideas up.
In terms of those kind of, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, and I think ultimately that is what makes this work shine in the end, is that it's better than any individual person could have come up with, because it's a product of so many talented people bringing their best together, so.
Yeah. And it's hundreds of artists, worldwide as well. I mean, it's Scott with ILM had artists in London as well as in Vancouver, all part of this team. So it's getting, all of the cream of the crop that work well with our individuals, vendor supervisors, but then can bring their specific talents to show, and it's magical.
How do you, talking about the kind of the Death Star thing you mentioned there, Scott, how much access do you have to kind of legacy assets, I guess is what I'm saying? Because of course we've got the number of movies, we've got the other TV shows that have existed. You've got to fit within that universe, but obviously you want to bring something new to the project as well. How do you go about finding that balance with the things you have access to, but also giving enough creative license to your artists to allow them to bring something new?
Absolutely. I mean, we're very lucky to have, all of that 40 plus years of legacy of ILM. So we have what we call our backlot, which is basically a big digital model toy shop, essentially, that we can, when we finish a show, we just package everything up and archive it. So we have a huge digital archive of all these catalogued vehicles and environments and assets that we put together for each show. So that they're all very well catalogued. So it's actually quite easy to find, do you remember this ship on Rogue One? Yes, we can go and find that and then bring it back. So we've got that aspect that we can troll through all these different eras. And obviously we've got people like Pablo Hidalgo, our Star Wars kind of lore expert, who we can just check and make sure that everything is kind of period correct when we're dealing with the specific kind of timeline of the show. And then also we've got our Lucasfilm archives as well, the physical models that were actually made. So we've got amazing reference photography of all of those miniatures that they can bring out their crates and photograph whatever you need. If you need a particular part, but quite often we're all Star Wars fans ourselves. We've got the books, of the miniatures, and we can kind of dive through those and find little bits and details of some of those. Because obviously, one of the things about the show with the spaceship work and the Death Star work is that we were trying to evoke that feeling of the miniature work that was done in the original trilogy. So we really tried to lean into that aesthetic.
Yeah, it really felt like you guys nailed that in the show, and in its sort of predecessor, if you like, Rogue One. It felt like, I don't know, it felt like it had that tangible feeling to it, like I could reach out and touch those models, whether they were models or whether they were, CG models. I talked about at the start this show not having those kind of big sort of showcase moments, but of course there are some. There are some in there. Mohen, the Eye of Aldhani is a hell of a sequence, and I know from talking to you on the Andor panel that you spent a very long time working on that sequence. Where do you draw inspiration for something like that? I think the phrase that visual effects artists and supervisors may relish or worry about even is like nothing I've ever seen before. There was the phrase we talked about at the panel before. Where do you begin?
It was definitely one of those moments where the expectation from Tony was to have something that felt like fresh and stunning and beautiful. There were so early on, and it's like well before even principal photography started on the show. We started talking about that sequence because it felt like one of the biggest design challenges we had on the show. In particular, because it had to meet a number of criteria. It had to still feel like plausible and grounded enough to fit overall in the show. You couldn't suddenly have something that felt magical or outlandishly fantasy in the show. It had to look sort of mesmerizing and serene enough that you believed that a religious sort of meditative festival could be based around that, where people would watch it in silence as a, religious festival. And then it had to still, when you fly into it, feel absolutely deadly and terrifying, like something that you could not safely fly a ship through. So we started early on looking at all sorts of just like celestial phenomena, from obviously like, meteors, shooting stars, auroras, just general like space photography. And we started with Scanline and Jelmer, the supervisor there, to do tests, just visual tests, which initially were actually probably slightly too sort of like maybe scientifically driven. And when we showed the first test to Tony, he was like, "No, it's not quite what I picture." And he sent us, which was at first terrifying because it was sort of like out of the spectrum of what we expected, pointillist paintings of like skies, where like these skies were just not abstract, but like basically impressionist paintings of skies, where skies were made up out of like tiny dots of different colors. And he was like that, and we're like, oh my god, how are we going to justify doing that in the sky? And so we basically started going like, okay, well, it has to be basically meteors and it like shooting stars effectively, and they have to burn out in different colors. But then how do we make this, like interesting and aesthetically pleasing? And one of the things which was interesting, because it wasn't necessarily how it was intended to be read, was the event was called like the Eye of Aldani. And in Tony's mind, it was really just more or less that, like this opening would form like where they could fly out, or initially think they could fly out at the end. But we started looking at close-up photographs of the human iris. And in particular, if you look at close-ups of blue-eyed, people like up close, there are these like incredibly complex patterns of like various colors. Like blue eyes have all of these greens and yellows and different edges that and these really thin lines that sort of weave around each other. And so that actually became like a huge inspiration for the color palette and the and also just sort of the aesthetic of it. And then lots and lots of iterations of trying stuff out, and the thing that you start with sort of 5, 6, 7 test shots and get like versions going, and then suddenly there'll be one shot where you're like, ooh, that one's good. So how do we get that feeling now into the other shots and into the other angles? And it's really an exploration process rather than like a straight line to an idea.
I have to say you absolutely nailed that sequence. I was sort of left, mouth agape, kind of looking at it on my big screen. Talking of big screens, like I interview a lot of people who work in, movies that end up in movie theatres. Your show, of course, is not in movie theatres, but how do you go about reminding yourself of the scale on which people might be watching this? Because, of course, people at home now might have a 70, 80, 100-inch screen.
I mean, we do review things on both like very large TVs here, and then ultimately there are multiple rounds of reviews, with the colorist on like the most highly calibrated monitors you can have. There are like high dynamic range reviews that we do because there'll be a high dynamic range release for the show as well. So by the time it goes out, we will have looked at every shot many, many, many times on different devices in different scenarios. But there are, for example, on the other hand, there are considerations where you go, well, in a movie theater, you can rely on the fact that people are always going to be in a dark room, so you can basically expose things differently, where when you know that you're working for streaming television, that has to be a consideration that things have to be more readable when there's more ambient light as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of finishing, we don't look to finish only for a television type release. Yeah, we finished everything in 4K, HDR. We've gone through all the machinations to allow it to be viewed on any platform And when we did the premiere for season 1, we did it at the El Capitan in Los Angeles on a movie theater screen. So you could project it on a screen and have the same experiences on your television at home. And while we should and need and continue to be mindful, for some of these aspects of how the show is made, we aren't restrictive either. We want to make sure you've got the proper experience no matter what platform you're on.
And there's an element also of just sort of future proofing in the sense that right now not everyone has a 4K or an HDR TV, but you want the show to still look good in 10 years when more people do.
Yeah. Well, if my local picture house had been showing every episode every Wednesday morning, I would have been straight down there buying a ticket. So maybe that's something that we should think about in the future. One of the other big sequences, of course, was the Luthen's lightsaber ship. Now, was that something that was mentioned in the script, or is that something that came out of your work as visual effects artists?
Just conceptually, Scott can talk more about the execution of that, but conceptually, that was actually a funny one because it happened pretty late in the writing process, and I just got a phone call from Tony one Saturday actually, and he was like, "Yeah, I feel like we don't have it. Like we're missing something. We need like a good like space beat in here. People will be disappointed if we don't have that." And so he basically said, "I'm thinking, something like where it ended up was end of episode 11. Initially was beginning of episode 12. Luthen leaving Saw's camp." And effectively more or less running into like a police patrol, and having to find a way to fight his way out of that. And he kind of left it at that, basically saying like, can you tell me what we can do? Because he knew that at this point in the process, he couldn't just randomly add like a thing without some boundaries around it. And I was like, okay, well, let me think about what we can do that is achievable in terms of how much time it'll take to shoot, how much time it'll make to execute it, and how many new assets we're sort of bringing in. And one of the things that I stumbled across was there was this ship, the interdictor, with a giant dish on the front, right, that had been built for Solo but barely used in the movie. And I was like, oh, well, here's a thing that we can, like make something out of that already exists but hasn't really been used before. I had just seen Ad Astra, which is the Brad Pitt movie, which has this beautiful opening sequence, which is sort of in the stratosphere, like on the edge of space and being in the atmosphere, which I just really liked and we hadn't done in Star Wars as a location for a space battle. So I thought that would be cool. And then for the weapons, the thing out of the conversation with Tony about Luthen's ship, one of the things he brought up earlier is that he said, like, well, I kind of want it to be like James Bond's Aston Martin, in the sense that it looks like a normal ship, but it has all of these hidden gadgets and weapon and defense mechanisms in it. And so that double beam weapon that came out of two things, like in my mind, where I early on, well, one of the things the Aston Martin has is the blades that come out of the tires, that can shred like cars that are next to it in a classic one. And so that's stuck
like a
in the back
Ben-Hur
of my
kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, if it's something we can do like that, like a weapon that goes out to the sides. And then the other thing that influenced that was a moment that I really liked at the end of Iron Man 2, where in the fight in the Japanese garden, he has like a one-off laser weapon that shoots out two beams, and he does like a spin, and all of the remaining people around him basically are cut down by it. And so I thought like, okay, let's try and pitch that. We prevised it out, and then I had to actually show it to Pablo Hidalgo and go like, can we do this? Is this allowed in Star Wars as a weapon?
Where are the boundaries?
We've done beam weapons before. You can have a beam that basically is like a continuous beam, but it should be something that is like there's a limitation on it. Which is why you're saying like, okay, you have to charge it up and then he can fire it. So long story short, like a lot of thought that went into it. But again, it sort of like evolved over time.
And Scott, that execution of that shot, then just trying to make sure, it does fit in within those boundaries. visually and the way it moves and the way that weapon is utilized. That must be sort of a difficult kind of tightrope to walk.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, just the task of actually integrating the weapon into the ship's design in a way that, like Mo was saying about the Aston Martin, you could look at it and you'd never know that it's armed to the teeth. So we had to figure out a way of actually hiding the cannons inside the ship's design and then allowing a way for them to deploy. Now, I'd always liked the design of in the film Troy and the design of the Spartan shields, which had a kind of a notch cut out of them and put their spear through it. So we had this kind of thought that we could basically bring the wings up to a kind of a vertical position where there's a notch at the bottom of the wing through which the cannon could then kind of come out of the wing kind of fulcrum, which was chunky enough to allow, because this thing the cannon can't be a tiny kind of pea shootery type thing. It has to be kind of a chunky, the body of it has to look like it's something you have to charge up for 30 seconds before unleashing this enormous blast of energy. So the main wing pivots were these big solid cylindrical barrels, which felt like a good place to put them on. So we had doors that opened on them, and the cannon would then come through that. That's that took a lot of time just to kind of figure out the mechanics of how that would work plausibly.
Well, you talked earlier, Mo, and you mentioned about having these real locations that kind of anchor you, at least. I mean, obviously with something like that we've just talked about with the ship, you've got this kind of open doors kind of situation, and you're trying to work out the boundaries yourself. How important are those boundaries to have, though, with the kind of location work? Because I talked about that Corriton refinery, wasn't it, in Essex, which gives the whole thing an industrial look. You also shot at the Barbican and at McLaren's F1 site in Woking. How important is it to have those kind of grounded location shoots for you to kind of build upon?
Yeah, I think it's really, really valuable because everyone goes into shooting the shots with a clear intent of what you want later. So what we normally do is we'll do a location scout well beforehand. So we'll go there with the directors, the DP, the production designers, and take lots of photos. And then the production designers will actually, with our input, work out how, if we're going, for example, to the McLaren building, which is a beautiful piece of architecture, how we transform that into a Coruscant spaceport, right? And so there's a bit of negotiation going on in terms of we have to make sure that we actually keep enough of the location to make it worth going there, but then at the same time aren't hamstrung that you can't make it feel like it's Star Wars. And so we basically agree early on okay, what are the key angles that we're going to shoot in a location like that? Then the art, concept art, will basically create paint overs of our photos and go okay, this is how it's going to look when it's all done. And then with that, the director and the DP can actually go in there and go okay, I understand now. If I shoot this way, then we're keeping this, and there's going to be spaceship out of this window, and all of those things, which is so much better than having someone shoot just into a blue screen and go we'll put a spaceship there later, and don't worry about it. So sometimes it does create maybe not more work, but different work than ultimately in post-production. And Scott can talk about, because obviously if you don't have a big blue screen there's a lot more roto, there's a lot more manual work to try and fit the digital and the real together. But I think ultimately you just still end up with something that feels more real.
Oh, absolutely. When you're able to, a full plate gives you that initial starting block where you've got the quality of the light that's actually hitting the environment, you've got the light direction, you're already off to a great start. And that in order to make your digital extensions look real, you're already got a model that you can kind of work towards. And actually, just going back to the theme of happy accidents, one of the things that we noticed about the plate, one of the plates in the McLaren building was these beautiful reflections of they have a lake outside, and the sun was hitting this lake and then bouncing into the building and creating these beautiful caustic reflections, moving, shimmering reflections on some of the bridges and structures. And, we'd initially thought of that's, because we're removing most of the outside, that's like, okay, that's something we're going to have to remove from the inside, because how do you justify that? And then it kind of gradually kind of dawned, well, maybe we could actually justify those by having something outside that actually causes that. So we built a little moat that runs around the outside that, we just hit a bit of sunlight kind of just to put little sparkles in the water. And that, again, is just little things that help tie what's going on in the plate with what's going on in the extension that you may not actually, consciously see and kind of interpret, but they all just help to kind of create this overall picture of everything just being this one photograph.
Yeah, it really does help you buy the situation. Yeah, Mohen.
Yeah, and I think that's two things there. One perfect example of things that I would have never thought of when we're on location shooting that. I was just like, oh God, these reflections. We're going to have to take all of that. And so when Scott and the team pitched it, I was like, oh my God, that's a brilliant idea. And it's so much better. And that it also, it forces complexity into the digital environments that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily do. Like it so often happens that even with just locations with skies and things like that, where you in your mind you go like, oh yeah, when we're going to go there, it's going to be all like this kind of weather. Like in season 1 in Scotland, there's a scene at the top of a mountain that where they're having a conversation. And initially, when this was written and when we were planning it, we're all like, yeah, it's going to be a great scene. And you're going to have these vistas of Scotland in all directions. And then we showed up that morning and it was so foggy that you had visibility of, 50 feet or less. And so it was just this big white soup. But the scene suddenly felt much more atmospheric, and it actually really helped the tone of the scene, that it was sort of claustrophobic. And so I think it's things like that are fun, because those are things that are kind of forced on you, but then ultimately make it feel more real, because not everything is designed by someone by hand.
It's the unexpected.
It certainly
friction.
adds an intimacy, doesn't it, when you have that fog around? Sorry, TJ.
I was saying the unexpected restrictions of the shoot. So if we go in with a good basis of an understanding of a location, everybody on the production team knows what they're shooting, but you still are restricted by the location. You still have to get the right camera angles. You don't have a wall you can just remove to get a camera where you want it to be. You have to shoot within the location. But then for us as well, once you have that plate, just as Scott and Mohen have described with the water at McLaren, you have another restriction or something within to work that you perhaps had never expected. And so it just allows everyone to think about things in a slightly different way and approach in a different way than if you only had a true blank canvas that then sometimes becomes too perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's also ultimately, even for full CG shots on this show, we always held ourselves to the standard of, well, if you had to shoot this, how would you actually shoot this? Would this be a helicopter shot? Would it be a drone shot? Would it be a crane shot? And ultimately, if it felt like, well, the shot that we're doing, as a full CG shot, wouldn't be achievable with a real camera, we said, well, let's not do that. Let's basically limit ourselves to things that where it's a choice. There are other movies where you have cameras that fly through a keyhole and do all sorts of crazy things. But for our show, I think for that grounded feel, keeping even full CG shots limited by the limitations of real cameras was actually really good.
Yeah, I really think in watching the show, when ILM invited me to come and do that panel, I had to watch the show again because I hadn't noticed the effects, in the best possible way. Obviously, there are those key moments where you kind of, it's an effect, but of course you're caught up in the story. But what struck me about Andor that stands out from other TV shows that I've seen in recent years is all of the work that you've done is always driving the story. It's always driving the character. It's never about showing off. It's never about showcasing a new technology. It's just serving the character and serving the story. And that's the important thing here, isn't it?
No, it really is. And I mean, we had just under 4,000 shots. So over the course of the series, there's a lot of work in there. There's a lot of invisible work, but there's a lot of big work. So we've got everything from giant CG shots to simpler paint outs to extensions that become organic within the scene. And it's the seamlessness that we're striving for. You don't want to notice the work. You want to be able to just experience the show, have it serve the story, and be able to enjoy it without noticing that there's visual effects happening.
Yeah, and we're often sort of kind of restricted again, sort of if something in the background became too attention grabbing, we just go like, let's take it out. We're not supposed to be looking there. We're supposed to be looking at the actor.
Mm. I'm kind of wondering now, like I'm thinking, I was up at the South Bank the other day and I was thinking, this has got a kind of Coruscant feel to it. It's got the kind of Barbican concrete look to it. So I'm sort of... You did? Yeah, all right. You almost did.
We did a location rec there, actually, yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to keep my eyes out for, season 2 shooting. That's what I'm saying. But I guess my question really is, given that you've gone down that route of having those physical known locations, is that kind of driving you to just keep that same aesthetic and for season 2 and not shoot in locations anymore because it's already defined those locations? Or are you seeking out locations that further expand on the ideas that you had in season 1?
Yeah, we're definitely keeping that same philosophy going of always anchoring shots in something real and something tangible. Like we basically sort of, what isn't strictly true, but we always said like, well, let's try to have like the first, like 50 feet in front of camera be real. Like let's have the things that people stand in, that they interact with, be real, and then we'll augment around that, we'll build around that. But that philosophy is definitely carrying on in season 2 as well.
As a last question, I'm just interested to kind of know about your interaction with the production designer, Luke Cole, that you've mentioned a couple of times. Fantastic work on this show. Obviously, he's building his sets down in Buckinghamshire and choosing locations and augmenting them with, certain builds. Does he then have a lot of work with you in terms of the post-production, like after the initial shooting? Is he with you at ILM looking over stuff, or is his work done in the physical world?
So we, like TJ and I, after the shoot finishes, we're actually co-locating with editorial into production offices. So, and that's where basically like we kept regularly checking in with Luke. Obviously, with season 1, we knew that there would be a season 2, so Luke was staying on through that period anyway. And we would basically I would try to keep those, regular conversations with him going. So if we had work in progress, we would show it to him like once a week or so and go like, hey, what do you think about where this is headed? He still had a couple of concept artists going that would help out, fill out blank spots where we and also then just work coming in again from vendors, and from Scott's team. Like they'll do like a first pass layout of something, a first pass design, and then I would try to get that in front of Luke. We'd have a chat about it, and I think he and I like 90% of the time clicked really well. But I found it really incredibly useful to sort of get his input on it.
Yeah, by design. I mean, we have these people who've been so instrumental and with the show for so long. To be able to call on them as a resource through the post-production period is immensely helpful. And Luke is one of those key collaborators.
Now, I wouldn't normally ask this question on my podcast about, what's your favorite, this, that, or the other. But as we're talking about an awards ceremony here, and we're talking about your nomination, could you each in turn just take a moment to tell me what your favorite shot is in the show? Even if it's not a shot that you worked on, I'd be interested to know.
Oddly, because it's not a particularly like attention grabbing shot, I keep going back to there's a shot which we shot at the Barbican, which is a very high wide shot of just seeing Clea walk towards her meeting with Vel, the secret meeting that they have there, and I love that shot because it to me it embodies like a lot of what we hope to accomplish with Coruscant, to make it feel at the same time like true to the prequels and like a fantasy, like insane metropolis, but also like a real place. And it was one of those where we replaced probably 80% of the frame with CG, and yet having shot that plate, I was so pleased that like it just all came together and it feels like a real place. And so that's one of my favorite shots in the show.
And probably a shot where you had to get rid of reflections from that lake below as well, right?
That one, no, that one's kind of around.
It's a different
corner.
shot. Oh, okay. You're thinking of the big wide one, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
TJ?
Yeah, I'll choose one of our all CG shots, which is a top down look as we're establishing Coruscant. We travel over buildings and we see, essentially it's a New York type establisher. It's a really fun. I mean, we don't have a lot of establishing shots in the show. It's that, as we've talked about, we haven't put in an egregious number of shots. They all serve a purpose. They all have a reason. And this establisher, as we bring us back into Coruscant, really is to me kind of the embodiment of big Star Wars in the grounded reality of the show that Tony had pitched and that Mohen has been protecting. And that's the type of establisher you'll see in any other major metropolitan city establishing shot on any show. You can get it with a helicopter. It takes you into the city, and yet we're in our fantasy of Coruscant and getting to experience the city like the locals would on any other television show you'd see in Coruscant. That's one that really stands out to me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Scott?
Can I have two?
Sure.
Okay. Always asking for more. I think there's two. There's the first shot in the space battle sequence where we see the what was the original design for the Star Destroyer kind of heave into view, and it was just such a beautifully executed shot with the so well realized in previews before. But kind of on a slightly a more personal note, I suppose my first jobs in the industry were actually as a model maker. So I was fortunate enough to catch the tail end of the model making era of visual effects. So, it was so nice to be able to really lean into that aesthetic, and very much, the Star Wars visual effects were the reason I got into this in the first place. So trying to make things look like the models that I knew so well from my youth was a real pleasure to actually really try and dig into the details of that. And also for it was to be able to bring one of Colin Cantwell, who was the original, one of the very first production designers on Star Wars, to bring one of his creations to life. And obviously Colin unfortunately died just in the while we're just finishing off the show. So it was a lovely way to be able to kind of pay a little bit of tribute to him as well, because in the audio you can hear that it says it's a Cantwell class ship. So I thought that was a really nice tribute and lovely to be part of that as well. And then the other thing was probably, it's not even an ILM sequence actually, it is the Eye of Aldani. I think that was one of the most spectacular sequences that just completely blew me away. The complexity and the detail of that was just stunning.
Great, good answer. Yeah, I had that same moment with the Colin Cantwell design there. I sort of thought, ooh, that's for me, because I'm a huge nerd that goes way back. All right, well, thank you so much, guys, for your time. It's great to see you again. I hope to see you again in the future. Maybe, we can talk about Andor 2 the next time. It always is a pleasure to talk to you. What I love about you guys is you're just as enthusiastic on the inside as we are on the outside. At the panel, this is the moment where I asked 1,000 people to give you applause, but I'll just give you some myself. And good luck to you. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Cheers,
Thank you so much, Jamie. Really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mohen, TJ and Scott there. And thanks so much to the folks at ILM for setting that up and making it all happen so quickly. Next up is another special episode in which I chat with Emmy-nominated sound technicians and artists Matthew Wood, David W. Collins, and in a separate interview, Daniel Dupree. They've been nominated for Obi-Wan Kenobi and for Mandalorian Season 3. And before August is over, there will be a third episode, so 3 episodes this month, on the VFX of Mandalorian Season 3 with Hal Hickel, former guest, and Grady Kofa. Then coming up in September, October and November, as previously promised for August, I have Spielberg and Scorsese VFX master Pablo Hellman, then creature effects guru Tom Spina of Spina Designs, as well as ILM VFX artist Charmaine Chan, and sound guru Max Smith. So plenty more to come. Please continue to share this podcast on social media, or what's left of it, and with your friends and colleagues. You know, this is a small podcast. It's just me and my laptop, and, you know, a love for doing it. But your support would be really appreciated. Patreon.com/Jamie Benning. You can also check out my new book, co-authored with my friend Justin Berger. It's called Return of the Jedi, The Unauthorized Timeline, 1976 to 2023, and it's available on Amazon. You can also support the podcast by buying some wonderful Filmumentaries merch, including mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. There's also t-shirts with Inside Jabba and Inside Jaws posters on them. You can buy one for your next film convention, and, you know, you'll be the only one there with one on, probably. Please check out the shop at filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. It's a long one, so I'll include that in the show notes. There's also an Etsy shop, Filmumentaries Etsy shop, where you can buy exclusive Inside Jabba prints. Great to get signed by the puppeteers that worked on Jabba back in 1982. I'll put the link of that in the show notes as well. And do remember to subscribe to the podcast, the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, Filmumentaries on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter at JamieSWB. And yeah, I think that's a full house, I think. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.